It is written in the scriptures that we should journey to Jerusalem 3 times a year. We are going up to the city of God, to Jerusalem, to celebrate.
The Lord told the children of Israel to honor 7 holy celebrations each year involving 3 journeys to Jerusalem. Each festival would be uniquely fulfilled in the coming of the Messiah. The holy days of our Lord, shadows of things to come.
Shalom and welcome to Zola Levitt Presents. I'm Miles, this is my wife Catherine, and we're continuing in our study of the holy days of our Lord. You know, Hanukkah and Purim are 2 extra-biblical feasts. In other words, they're not mandated in Leviticus 23 like the other holy days, and yet they're very significant to the Jewish people. Hanukkah, for example, is the Feast of Dedication. It's when the Jewish people were delivered from Antiochus between the Testaments. And Yeshua kept the feast.
Yeah, in John 10:22, he keeps the feast, the Feast of Dedication. He's there, he shows up.
Yep.
It's written also that the Hanukkah lights were so bright in the time of the Lord, it would light up all of Jerusalem.
Amazing. Well, think about that, the
menorahs.
light of the world, Yeshua, Jesus Christ, the light of the world is striding through Solomon's porch in Jerusalem with the whole city lit up, the light of the world in Jerusalem being lit up for the Feast of Dedication. So let's go to Zola in Israel, in front of the Knesset, as he teaches us about Hanukkah.
In the first century, it was tradition to light an oil lamp on each night of the 8-day celebration called Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, or Festival of Lights. On the 25th day of Kislev in 164 BC, the previously defiled temple was cleansed and rededicated to the service of the Lord. The Messiah and his disciples celebrated this tradition. As it states in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, at that time the Feast of the Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon.
Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. It's one of those festivals where the Jewish people light candelabra. There's a beautiful one behind me, a menorah it's called in Hebrew. This 7-branch menorah is the one from the tabernacle, and it's a very ornate one. You can see the figure of Moses, his hands lifted up and held up during the battle, and many other figures in Jewish history are carved on it. We're on Capitol Hill, in effect. Right across from me is the Knesset, the Parliament of Israel, and this is a public park. People come and go, of course, with children and so on all day long. And we came here to tell the story of this festival. It's all prophesied in Daniel 8. Now as he was speaking with me, that's Gabriel in the chapter, I was in a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and set me upright, and he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. And Daniel had a vision of various animals with different numbers of horns and so on, and we would be perhaps a little confused, but the angel here interprets that vision. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it. When Alexander of Greece attacked Medo-Persia, it was broken up into 4 kingdoms. That's a historical fact. And it says, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, this is interesting. While he's telling this story, his prophecy leaps to the end times, because he says, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. This is obviously a reference to the Antichrist and the end times of Israel, and it says, His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. It's as if Gabriel is saying, while I'm on the subject of Greco-Syrian kingdoms and rulers and so on, there's a dark prince of the end times out of the same people. And this is the passage that convinces many that that personality will be Syrian or Greco-Syrian, something of that nature. It says, and through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. This is one of the most surprising prophecies. A man who will destroy many by way of peace. So here we are in a time of peace processes of Israel and so on, and finding that someone will destroy many with peace. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. So in opposing the Messiah, of course, he'll lose. But at a time when practically the whole world at least pretends to make peace here, it's sobering to read of destruction by way of peace. Well, it was celebrated by the Messiah himself in John 10:22, that it was at Jerusalem, the Feast of Dedication, and it was winter. This festival comes in December normally. He had come here for the festival, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. That's the southern end of the temple, above the Hulda gates by the southern steps of the temple. That's where the poor people typically entered the temple. Then came the Jews round about him and said unto him, How long dost thou make us to doubt? If thou be the Messiah, tell us plainly. He answered them, I told you, and you believed not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But ye believe not, because ye are not of my sheep. As I said unto you, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father which gave them to me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. A very important passage, obviously. And then he utters the final statement, I and my Father are one. At this moment, the light of the world reveals himself on the Festival of Lights.
Good day and welcome. My name is Gavin Finley, and this is part 5 in a series of videos on Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks. In this video, we'll be looking at the 3 edicts put forward as candidates to initiate the 70 weeks prophecy, and we'll be particularly looking at the timelines to see where those timelines end. There are a number of articles on this subject over at the website, endtimepilgrim.org. Understanding mysteries does not come from the intellect, it comes from devotion to God. Our scriptures from Daniel 9:25, Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So a certain royal edict initiates a timeline of 7 sevens plus 62 sevens, or 69 sevens of biblical years. The 69 sevens of biblical years are 483 360-day years. As we discussed in the earlier video on biblical time, God dispenses holy time to us from his throne based upon the mathematically perfect circle of 360 degrees. And this is the prophetic time we see in Holy Scripture. And so prophetic time is given to us in terms of 360-day years. This is from our second Rosetta Stone for biblical time, and it comes to us out of Revelation chapter 12. 1,260 days equals 3.5 years. We do the math and we come to 360 days, which is the number of degrees in a circle. So the 483 years are biblical years of 360 days. We do the math and we come out to 173,880 days. And this is a number arrived at by noted evangelical scholar and Scotland Yard inspector Sir Robert Anderson, and he published his breakthrough work on the 70 weeks prophecy during the late 19th century. We'll convert the 173,880 days back into cosmic time by dividing by 365.2422, being the number of days in a solar or calendar year. And we get 476.0677 solar years, which turns out to be 476 years and 25 days. Our timeline must end up on a day that sees Messiah the Prince. And in all of the 3+ years of the ministry of Jesus, there was only one day in which he presented himself to his holy city and to his holy people in any sort of a political or royal manner as Messiah the Prince. And this was on Palm Sunday.
And Jesus resolutely took the road for Jerusalem. command your disciples to be quiet.
I tell you, if they were to be quiet, the stones themselves would begin shouting.
So which royal decree will be the starting gun to initiate the 476 years, or the 69 weeks? Was it the Edict of Cyrus in 538 BC? Is it the Edict of Ezra in 458 BC? Or is it the decree of Artaxerxes Longimanus given to Nehemiah in 445 BC? The wording and the merits of these three decrees we shall leave for a future session. In this video we're not going to arrive at our 2-day accuracy for the 69 weeks. Here we'll be content just to lay out the three 476-year timelines, beginning with those three edicts, and see where these timelines end up, just in terms of the season and the year. And we'll start with the Edict of Cyrus. Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 538 BC. This was the night of Belshazzar's feast and the writing on the wall. The Edicts of Cyrus in 538 BC freed the captives of Judah, allowing them to return home to Jerusalem. The Persian king gave his blessing and provided funds to rebuild the temple. As we can see, the timeline going out from Cyrus ends far too early. It ends up in 62 BC, in a historical no-man's land with no sign of Messiah the Prince to be found. The timeline is 93 years short of the Passion Year. So we can conclude that this is the wrong edict. Now we'll look at the next candidate, the Ezra decree, which came in the 7th year of Artaxerxes Longimanus. It was given to Ezra the scribe, and the date here is 458 BC. Laying out the 476-year timeline from 458 BC, we come to 19 AD. Did anything happen in 19 AD that might possibly answer to Messiah the Prince? And the answer is no. And we are 13 years short of the Passion Year. So the Ezra decree of 458 BC falls short. It is the wrong edict. But what if we insist on wrongly using 483 solar years of 365.24 days to measure out the 69 weeks of years instead of 360-day biblical years? We end up with a terminus in 26 AD. We are still 6 years short of 32 AD and the true appearance of Messiah the Prince. It's an intriguing thing, but there are many people rising up nowadays who insist that the 69 weeks terminated and was fulfilled by the baptism of Jesus. Does this satisfy the prophecy? No, it does not. And why? Because the text in Daniel 9:25 specifically calls for a decidedly political, even royal appearance of Jesus as Messiah the Prince. The baptism of Jesus was none of that. It was a priestly event. But we shall look at their chronology anyway. Here is the Ezra timeline using 483 solar years instead of 483 biblical years, or 360 days. The timeline ends in 26 AD. It clearly falls short of the mark by some years. But their inability to deliver up an accurate timeline doesn't seem to bother them. They have an agenda, so they push this Ezra chronology quite strongly, even though it does not fit into anything resembling Messiah the Prince. So we need to be warned here. The people advancing this false chronology include preterists, historicists, and many caught up in dominion theology and replacement theology. Some have a crusading agenda, but do they have a timeline that terminates neatly and accurately on the 15th year of Tiberius? Because Luke reports that the ministry of John the Baptist, and therefore the baptism of Jesus, came during that year. Luke reports that when all the people were baptized, it came to pass that Jesus also was baptized. And when was the 15th year of Tiberius? Let's find out. The reign of Tiberius Caesar began on August the 19th of 14 AD. Therefore, the 15th year of Tiberius would have begun 14 years later, on August the 19th of 28 AD. The baptism of Jesus would have come soon after that in the fall of 28 AD, coinciding with the auspicious season of the Hebrew New Year. Sir Isaac Newton favored the Ezra decree to initiate the 70 weeks prophecy. He laid out a timeline of 483 solar years, aiming for a terminus of the 69 weeks with the baptism of Jesus. It seems that many are following his lead as we approach the latter days. But as we can see, there is a problem with this timeline. The edict began with Ezra in the 7th year of Artaxerxes in 458 BC. Even incorrectly using 365.24-day calendar years and reckoning Messiah the Prince to be the baptism of Jesus, the timeline terminates in 26 AD, but nothing of any messianic importance was going on in 26 AD. As we have seen, the true year of the baptism of Jesus was 28 AD and not 26 AD. So this Ezra timeline, using the profane calendar years of a fallen cosmos, still falls short of its own mark by a full 2 years. So again, the Ezra decree of 458 BC cannot be made to fit. It is the wrong edict. Now let's check out the timeline initiated by the edict given to Nehemiah. As we read in Nehemiah chapter 2, it was in the month of Nisan, the 20th year of Artaxerxes Longimanus, that Nehemiah went to the king. This was in the springtime of 445 BC, and we're going to prove that in the subsequent video. When we lay out the 476-year timeline from the springtime of the Nehemiah edict year of 445 BC, we find that it does indeed connect into the springtime of the Passion year of 32 AD. So is this the correct edict? We haven't proven it yet, but from what we've seen so far, the Nehemiah timeline is beginning to look quite promising. In the next video, we'll be refining this chronology by using the lunar cycles as a second measuring line on the 69 weeks, and using the moon phase data, we shall confirm that the 69 weeks began on the second day of the Nisan moon of Nehemiah chapter 2 and terminated on the 10th day of the Nisan moon right on Palm Sunday. The timeline that we see here will be presented later on in this study. The NASA lunar data will tell us when the new moons came through for the Nisan of Nehemiah in 445 BC and for the Nisan of the Passion year in 32 AD. Once again, the 70 weeks are 10 jubilees. They are years that God counts in his reckoning of holy history and holy time. It seems that God is only counting jubilees inside the 70 weeks. He's not counting them right now. And when the 70th week opens up in some future year, there will be 1 week or 7 biblical years left before the arrival of Messiah. Then the trumpets of Jubilee will sound to begin that epic future Jubilee that will usher in the millennium of Messiah. So what is the point of this study of Daniel's prophecy of the 70 weeks? Well, here's some good information. The terminus of the 69 weeks brought us the first coming of Messiah. There is a gap of nearly 2,000 years. Then there will be a future 70th week, the final 7 years of this present evil age. This final 7-year period has been determined, cut out of time, especially set aside for God's determined dealings with all of his covenant people from both houses of Israel. The 7 years will end with the second coming of Messiah. And so ends the 10 Jubilee cycles of the 70 weeks. The second coming of Messiah will be followed appropriately by the Jubilee year.
You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture.
Welcome to a very special edition of Jewish 101, a program for anyone who wants to understand more about Jewish in general and especially the Jewish tradition. So let's talk about Hanukkah, which is fast approaching. I'm Mark Golub. It's wonderful to be with you again. Thank you for all your lovely notes and cards. But tonight, and this program, I want to talk about Hanukkah. So let's do this. Let's take a look at the history of Hanukkah. Then we'll look at the story of Hanukkah, which is what most of us know from our childhoods. And then we'll take a look at the basic ways in which Hanukkah is celebrated in Jewish homes. First, the history of Hanukkah, which can be said to begin in the 4th century BCE, when a young king from Macedonia was said to have conquered the then known world. Alexander the Great was only 20 years old after the death of his father Philip, and he began his conquest of the Persian Empire and Syria, Judea, and Egypt, and as far east as India. When Alexander conquered Judea in 333 BCE, he had a very benevolent policy towards the Jews. While he did tax Judea, he permitted the Jews to practice their Jewish tradition as they wished. And there's even evidence that for a period of an entire year, every Jewish family named any boy child Alexander. Unfortunately, Alexander was not to live long, and he died 10 years later at the age of 33. Upon his death, his generals divided his kingdom among themselves. The Ptolemies took Egypt to the south. There was the Macedonian kingdom to the north and west, which was Greece and would eventually become the Roman Empire. And then there was the Middle East, ruled by the Seleucid family, also known as the Syrians. They were all Greek Hellenists at the time, but the Seleucid family was also known as the Syrians. Now, the Syrian kings often went by the name of Antiochus, or some of you may pronounce it Antiochus. Most of the time, the kingdoms that were divided out of Alexander's kingdom warred with each other, each trying to extend their respective control. And Judea was often caught in the middle and was ruled alternately by the Seleucids of Syria or the Ptolemies of Egypt. But then, in the 2nd century BCE, Antiochus IV, who was also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, and Epiphanes means God incarnate, Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, determined that the most effective means of strengthening his entire empire would be to impose one cultural system on all the different groups. All the groups under his control would be one culture. And so he decided to Hellenize the Syrian Empire, to make all the different little cultural and ethnic groups under his control act and think the same way like Greeks, Hellenists. And this homogenization of his realm, he believed, would strengthen his kingdom, give it a solidarity, a unity, and give him an advantage in his battles with the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Greek Macedonians. And so in Judea, in the year 175 BCE, a horrible year in Jewish history, 175 BCE, Antiochus proclaimed that the practice of Judaism, Torah, would no longer be acceptable. And on a Shabbat, Antiochus entered Jerusalem, butchered Jews everywhere, took Jewish women and children to be sold as slaves, plundered Jerusalem, razed the city's walls, took control of the temple in Jerusalem, which he dedicated to the god Jupiter, turned it into a Greek-style gymnasia, even erected a statue of himself inside the temple. He outlawed circumcision, established cult prostitution in the temple, and specifically sacrificed unclean animals there, such as pigs, in the temple. And he forced Jews to worship him as their god upon pain of death. And by the way, Antiochus was merciless against anyone in his entire realm, not just Jews, who refused to Hellenize and to worship him. And after the initial horror and assault, how do you think the Jews of Judea reacted to those changes made by Antiochus? How did the Jews of Judea react? In the main, for the most part, a large portion of the Jewish population of Judea was just as happy to wear Greek garments, to wrestle naked inside the temple, and to embrace Hellenistic culture, just as many modern Jews embrace the Western culture of today to the extent that they virtually abandon the Jewish tradition and Jewish styles of life. So too did this happen in the 2nd century BCE under Antiochus IV, as it happened to the Jewish exiles in Babylonia in the 6th century BCE. It's a constant theme of Jewish life, that when Jews are free to assimilate, many do just that. And I'm not equating what American Jewry is today to what the Jews of the 2nd century in Judea were doing when they embraced Hellenism. But there are some similarities. And there are similarities which should just give us pause as we try to think through who we are as Jews today. Anyway, there was a Jewish leader in the Jewish town of Modi'in. And Modi'in's about 19 miles west of Jerusalem, a city which, by the way, still exists and is a flourishing Israeli community today. But there was a Jewish leader in Modi'in, the priest of Modi'in, named Mattathias, or Mattatyahu. And Mattathias had 5 sons, Simon or Simeon, Eliezer. There was John, known as Yochanan. There was Jonathan, Yehonatan. And there was Judah, Yehuda. And in the year 167 BCE, in the town of Modi'in, Syrian soldiers gathered at the town altar. And they tried to force a Jew to sacrifice a pig on the altar. And when the Jew did so, Mattathias took a sword out of a Syrian scabbard, slew the soldier and the Jew who had sacrificed the pig, and he turned to the crowd and proclaimed, "Every one of you who is zealous for the law and wishes to maintain the covenant of Adonai, follow me." And Mattathias and his 5 sons rushed into the hills, and a few Jews followed. It's always a few Jews who follow. And from then on, under the leadership of Judah, who turned out to be a genius of a general and a warrior, and was given the name Maccabee, which is normally translated as the hammer for his fighting power. Judah the hammer, Yehuda Maccabee. Though there's also a tradition that the word Maccabee is an acronym for the phrase from the Torah, Michamocha Ba'ilim Adonai, a phrase which is translated to be, "Who is like unto thee among the mighty, O Lord," or Adonai. But whatever, under Judah's leadership, a small band of Jews began a quixotic journey to defeat what was then the mightiest military empire of its time, the Seleucid Syrian Empire. And Judah and his army, known as the Maccabees, fought what we would call a guerrilla war. They knew the land like the back of their hands. They hid in caves during the day. They struck Syrian military outposts at night, drove the Syrians crazy. And then over time, Antiochus's generals sent their tanks into Judea. What were the tanks of the day? Elephants, carrying soldiers who were archers, bows and arrows, to fight against the Jews. The Syrians would sit on top of the elephants and would fire arrows down at the Maccabees. And there were heroic stories of Maccabees who would risk their lives or even sacrifice their lives by running under the elephants and pushing a sword into the elephant's soft underbelly, the only vulnerable spot on an elephant, to bring the elephant crashing to earth, sometimes falling on the Maccabee himself. And tradition has that Judah's brother Eliezer died in such a fashion. And as the Maccabees continued to fight, a group of more observant Jews, called at the time the Hasidim, the pious ones, the Hasidim, they gave the Maccabees their seal of approval. And when that happened, the Maccabees began to have greater and greater popular support. More and more Jews joined the Maccabees. And in the end, the truth is, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, had bigger fish to fry, bigger problems on his plate. And he finally said to his generals, "We're wasting time and effort and soldiers in the fight against the Maccabees. It's time to redeploy." And the Maccabees, a small band of courageous, committed Jews who believed they had the right to their own self-identity, their own ethnic identity, and a Jewish way of life, actually defeated the mighty Syrian army around the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The Maccabees won back the Temple Mount. By the way, for many Jews, that's where the story ends, with the Maccabees reclaiming the temple. In actuality, the Maccabees still had to fight throughout the rest of Judea, and the war continued for many years. And wherever Judah was victorious, especially at the beginning, he would bring Jews back to the safety of Jerusalem. And after 7 years of fighting, Judah was actually killed in battle. Judah died in battle. And he was succeeded by his brother Yochanan, who was then captured by the Syrians and executed. Yochanan was succeeded by his brother Jehonatan, who ultimately made peace with Syria in 157 BCE. But Jehonatan is still killed 12 years later by a Syrian king who fears another Jewish revolt. And it's not until the year 141 BCE, 26 years after Mattathias and Judah began the Jewish revolt against Syria, that Syria finally made a formal peace with Judah's last brother, Simeon. And the Maccabees establish a monarchy of their own called the Hasmonean dynasty, which is granted full independence by Rome in 139 BCE, and this marks the only time in Jewish history that the Jews had sovereignty over the land of Eretz Yisrael from the time of the Babylonian exile in 586 BCE until Rome takes independence away from the Hasmonean dynasty in the year 40 CE. And then 30 years later, it will sack the city of Jerusalem, and Rome will destroy the Second Temple in the year 70. But it's important to understand that the Maccabees establish a monarchy known as the Hasmonean dynasty. And incidentally, one of the explanations for why the book of Maccabees is not included in the Bible, in the Ketuvim, the writings, is that when the Jewish people went to put together, when the rabbis put together, canonized the books of the Bible, it was under Roman control. The Jews were under Roman control, and the Jews felt it was not politic to put into their Bible a story of the defeat of the group that would one day ultimately become the Roman Empire. And the other reason why people and historians believe Hanukkah is not in the Bible is the Hasmonean dynasty. The Bible itself, the Jewish Bible, is all about the monarchy of King David, who according to Jewish tradition will ultimately, the Messiah will ultimately come from King David. So the Bible is all about the monarchy and the kingship of King David and then Solomon, etc. And that the rabbis did not want to confuse the issue by putting another monarchy, the Hasmonean monarchy, into the Jewish Bible. But that's the history of the Maccabees and their fight against the Syrian Empire. A fight in which the real miracle of the events is that a small group of committed Jews believed so passionately and deeply in their right to live as free Jews that they were able to defeat the great Syrian army and ultimately gain total independence for the Jewish people.
I have seen that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and that it should not be altered, that the figures were as He wanted them, that His hand was over and hid a mistake in some of the figures.
Rather than admit that she was in error, Ellen Harmon claimed that God was the one who had made the mistake and had covered it up himself. Ellen's controversial vision forced the readjustment of many Adventist dates and doctrines, even though the 1843 date had now been adjusted to 1844. It was still in error. Nevertheless, the 1844 date became the foundation for many Central Adventist doctrines and beliefs, which continue to be held to this day.
The Lord shew me in vision more than 1 year ago that Brother Crozier had the true light of the cleansing of the sanctuary. At the time appointed for the judgment, the close of the 2300 days in 1844, began the work of investigation and blotting out of sins. All who have ever taken upon themselves the name of Christ must pass its searching scrutiny.
No Seventh-day Adventist would dare deny that Ellen G. White's comments on a certain portion of Scripture determine the group's acceptance or rejection of historical views held on those Scriptures.